Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Maya and this is Inspired by Maya. So today's video is a little bit different than my usual. I'm not doing oh my gosh, the amount of times I've done that, guys. So today's video is a little bit different to my usual. I'm not doing a sewing tutorial, but I'm going to be showing you the basics of sewing. So this is officially the first episode to my Sewing 101 series, where I help you to understand the basics of sewing. So like what equipment you may need, terminology, I can't even think right now. I've literally got so much information to give you, so I don't want to ramble. Let's move on to the first topic, which is going to be needles. So I'm going to break down the two types of needles. We have hand sewing needles and machine needles. So let's start with hand needles. There's two types that are most commonly used. One of them is called sharps, which is just a general all-purpose needle. You can use it to fix seams, or you can use it to do blind hems on the bottom of your pant. If it's thin enough, you can add beads to your garments, so it can be used for a wide range of things. The other needle is the embroidery needle. It just has a larger hoop really and a thicker needle, so you can put thicker threads into thicker fabrics and stuff basically. But those are the most commonly used hand needles. Now on to machine needles. Machine needles vary in thickness and size, and you can get universal sewing machine needles, but they don't always work on all fabrics. So basically, sewing machine needles are measured in numbers. So the smaller the number, the lighter the needle will be, the thinner it will be, and the bigger the number, the thicker the needle will be, which means it's more suitable for heavier fabrics. I'll put a chart in right here just so you can understand it a bit better, but the lower end will be used for like fabrics like organza and fine lace, and then medium weight would be like your suiting fabrics or your cottons and stuff, and then the heavier needles would be used for denim and like twill or coutil. You want to be sewing with the right needle for your fabric, because some issues can occur, which I'm going to talk about now. So when it comes to fabrics, we have woven and knit fabrics, and when it comes to knit fabrics, the machine needles get a bit picky, because basically with a woven fabric you want the needle to be sharp so that it pokes through, but with a stretchy fabric, because of the way it's put together, you don't actually want it to poke through, because that can cause ladders and holes in your fabric. So you need a rounded edge needle that will push the fibers apart essentially. So it's not making a hole, it's just spreading the fibers apart so that it can push the thread through. So you can get ballpoint needles, jersey needles and stretch needles. I also want to mention that there's leather needles as well, which are super sharp, so they can poke right through the fabric, and they're also used for vinyl as well. A little tip for when you're sewing leather though, I know this is a bit advanced and this is a basic video, but when you're sewing leather, you want the stitch length to be pretty wide so that it doesn't poke too many holes in the fabric, because it will get weak and it can rip the fabric, which we just don't want. Another type of needle is the twin needle. Again, it will run through the varying thicknesses and sizes, but you can get twin needles which just allow you to sew like a double row of stitches on your sewing machine, and it just goes in the same way a normal needle would. So now I'm going to talk about threads. When it comes to sewing, there's many different uses for thread. Obviously we use it in seams, or you can use it to do top stitching or embroidery, so you're going to need different kinds of threads for different purposes. But I'm going to start with the most common and useful type of thread which you're going to need, which is like a cotton or polyester kind of thread. These threads are multi-purpose weight, which means they can be used for most fabrics. So when you're picking your thread, you want to make sure that you're using a decent quality brand. So some brands that I'd recommend are Gutterman, Coats and Clark and Moon Thread. I personally use Moon Thread just because it's the most affordable, and to be honest, it's never really caused me problems. The next type of thread is embroidery thread, and this comes as a floss, so you're not able to use it on your machine. So the embroidery thread is usually made up of 6 strands, so you're able to separate them so that you can use the thread to your desired thickness basically. And you can also get silk thread for your sewing machine, which works well with silk obviously and wool. We've also got nylon thread, which is really strong, so it's really great to use on seams that are going to have a lot of stress, like corsets for example. A lot of strain goes on them when you're lacing them up, but with nylon thread, you know them seams are gonna stay strong. There's also invisible thread, which if you haven't seen my video already, I used it in my blue corset to attach the rhinestones, just because I didn't want you to be able to see any of the thread. They come clear and in a dark tinted brown kind of colour, so they can be used for light and dark fabrics, and the thread is usually made of nylon, so it is again really strong. The last thread I want to talk about is elasticated thread. This is probably one of my favourite threads. So this can be used to make like shirt bandeaus, and you know when you have tops with the little elasticated wrist and stuff. So this can be applied in so many ways on your garments. You can get really creative with it, so you can get them in different colours, and you can get some with like metallic strands in them, so they can look really cool. I've actually got a video coming out soon where I show you how to make a shared bandeau top, so I can demonstrate how to do sharing and stuff like that. Now let's talk about essential equipment. So I'm going to start off with a seam ripper. We all hate seam ripping, but we really do need it when we're sewing. It's so essential because even advanced sewers make silly mistakes, so they have to unpick it, but it also comes in handy for when you want to upcycle garments. So when I did my last video, which was the pinstripe shirt upcycle, I had to unpick the sleeves from the body so that I could tailor it to my size. Oh my gosh, okay, scissors. These are my scissors, which I dedicate to my sewing passion. So you need 2 pairs of scissors when it comes to sewing. This is my paper scissor, and I just use it for cutting out patterns, and then this one is my fabric scissor, which is obviously just for the fabric. I can't stress it enough, like please don't use your fabric scissors on paper because it will blunt the blade and it won't cut through the fabric. If you can't cut your fabric out properly, it's really gonna make you dislike sewing, because cutting out the fabric is something that a lot of people don't like it takes really long. So if you have a pair of scissors that you have to struggle with, it's just not fun. So definitely get a pair of scissors and dedicate it to sewing. To be honest, these aren't even proper fabric scissors. Like I got a 3-pack of scissors from Poundland years ago, and I just dedicated them to paper and fabric, and they're still going strong. They are getting a little bit blunt now, but it's probably time for me to just invest in a good pair of fabric scissors. But really, like, you can just buy any cheap scissors and just dedicate it to fabric. The next essential thing to sewing is marking your fabric. So there's loads of different things that you can use to mark your fabric, but the 2 main ones are tailor's chalk and water erasable markers, which are personally my favorite. But you have to be careful with them, because if you don't test it on your fabric beforehand, you might have the disaster of it not coming out. So make sure you do that. Some other types of markers are air erasable markers and heat erasable markers. They're both really good, but I personally don't really use them because the air erasable markers can sometimes take too long for the markings to disappear. And with the heat erasable markers, when your fabric reaches below, I think it's -1 degrees, them lines are coming back. Imagine you live in a cold place and you've made a garment, and then you go outside and then the lines just start to appear. And the next essential piece is the measuring tape. If you're a sewer, you're just definitely gonna need a measuring tape. Obviously, these are really good for just checking your pattern against the fabric that you've just sewn. So say my sleeve was supposed to be 45 centimeters, I can check if the inseam is 45. Also, because it's flexible, it's good to measure curved edges and stuff like that. Just gonna leave this on me now, feels right. And the next really important thing is pins. So I use these pins which have, oh my gosh, guys, okay, I need to get some new pins because mine are all bent like this, because the amount of times I sew over them in the overlocker and then it just got, like, I've got a 90-degree angle in my needles. It's so bad, and they're getting blunt. So yeah, look, that's an example, look at that. But anyways, pins are absolutely essential. I like to use the ones with the balls on them because they're easy to put in and take out. But with pins, you have to be careful, just like with your needles, because if you're using a fine fabric like organza, you want to use a thin pin in it. These pretty much work on all of them. Also, I advise that you change your pins regularly because they can get blunt. Like mine are definitely getting blunt, and I've had situations where it's pulled the threads on my fabric and my final garment just has this little tug on it, and it's just not good. Okay, so now we can talk about sewing machines, and there's so many different types of sewing machines. Like I was doing some research before this video and I didn't know there was so many different types, but I'm gonna cover the main ones that you'll probably hear about. So as a home sewer, you're probably gonna have have a domestic machine, and these are just small and portable most of the time, but they're getting pretty heavy duty, you know what I mean? But my one's really light. I have a Singer Tradition. I've had it for years and it literally does everything I've need. Like, I have tested this machine and it has stood the test. Like, how many years later it's still going strong. So as a beginner machine, I definitely recommend this one. It has all the basic functions that you need, like a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. It also has a automatic threader, but mine broke. It has a buttonhole feature, a one-step buttonhole. You can obviously adjust the width, the length, and you have a stitch selection. You know, for a basic machine, it has a decent amount of decorative stitches, but those are the main things that you'll get on a basic sewing machine. The straight stitch is pretty much used on every seam. Like, you can't really sew if you don't have a straight stitch. They allow you to sew up the side seams, put on facings, do pockets and everything. The other type of sewing machine is an industrial sewing machine, and these can only do straight stitches, but they're so powerful. Like, when I was at my university course, I used the industrial machine for the first time, and when I put my foot on that pedal, shoom, like, they're so sensitive and so powerful, but they're really good quality. Like, they're so durable. But you'll find these in factories and stuff, but to be honest, as a beginner sewer, you don't really need to think about that. Like, personally, it's not something I would even probably invest in the future, because the domestic machines are really good. Now I'm going to talk about my favorite machine, which is the overlocker. Even though you can't sew everything with it, it still comes in really handy. So you can't sew stretchy fabrics with a straight stitch because it doesn't allow it to stretch. You need to sew with a zigzag stitch, which allows it to stretch with the fabric. And the overlocker just makes this so much easier, and it makes the inside of your garments look neat. There's so many different things you can do with it. Like, you can do rolled hems, you can do gathering with it, you know, you clean seams on the insides of your fabric. And obviously the main thing of the overlocker is that when you're sewing, it cuts the edge of the fabric, and oh, it's so nice. The main thing about the overlocker is for the clean seams on the inside of your garment. So as you're sewing, it actually trims away the excess of the fabric. This feature can be disengaged in pretty much all overlockers, I believe. One thing I need to say about the overlocker though is that it's so annoying to thread and rethread. Like, the structure of this machine is so complicated, and if one thread isn't threaded properly, it's not going to overlock properly. So you really want to make sure you do that properly. And a lot of things can go wrong. Like, the overlocker is really dependent on timing. So if you do get an overlocker and it stops working, my advice would be just to take it to the sewing machine repairer, because they know what they're doing. Mine wasn't working for a long while, and I still did manage to fix it myself, but that's because my problem was actually minor. But if your overlocker does go out of sync, you're going to need to take it to a repairman. Before I move on to the next machine, I just want to mention the overlocker I have. It is the, I don't know specific numbers, but it's the Toyota SL differential feed, and it has 4 threads on there, so I'm able to do 2, 3 and 4 thread overlock. Next is the cover stitch machine. Cover stitch machines are able to hem the garments really nicely, especially stretchy fabrics. If you've tried hemming a stretchy fabric under a sewing machine with a straight stitch, you can get pulling and then it ripples the edge of your fabric and it just doesn't look good. So when you're hemming stretchy fabrics on the sewing machine, you want to use a zigzag stitch to avoid that, but even that sometimes can still make it pull. So this is where the cover stitch machine comes in, and it does 2 rows of straight stitching on the top of the garment, and then underneath you've got like an overlocked seam, and it allows the fabric to still stretch. It also has other features like adding binding, doing top stitching and like decorative effects to your fabric. And last but not least, there's embroidery machines. I really want to get one in the future, hopefully. But there's different types of embroidery machines. So some of them come with like built-in designs where you just select what you want and then you put it in the hoop and you can start sewing. And then the more advanced ones is where you can like plug in a USB and put your designs on there. Something that really determines the price of embroidery machines is the amount of threads you can have on them, because obviously with embroidery designs you might want the leaves to be green and the flower to have like a ombre yellow and red, or you know what I mean, something like that. And the more colors you want on it, the more expensive it's going to be for the machine to process all those threads. Now let's talk about presser feet. The presser foot is a small piece of metal near the needle of the sewing machine. It's the function that keeps the fabric in place when you're sewing, and you can't sew without it. You can get so many different attachments for your sewing machine. The main ones that you get with your sewing machine are the normal foot and the zipper foot. The normal foot just gives you space to do a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch and some of the decorative stitches, and the zipper foot just allows you to get really close to both sides of the zipper when you're sewing it. So I know that some of the machines are coming with a lot more feet now, but some other ones that I want to mention are the invisible zipper foot. This one's great because I don't usually put in visible zippers. I like to put invisible zippers in, so I got a foot specific to this so that when I'm sewing it, the zipper teeth actually slot into the groove so that the needle gets really close to them, and then when I zip it up it really is invisible because the stitch is so close to the teeth. There's also the rolled hem foots, which can come in different thicknesses. I've actually got 3 of them and I haven't even used them on any garments because I'm really scared, because they are hard to use. I mean, once you master it you'll be fine, but I'd rather not mess up the garment that I spent so much time making. But they're great to get that clean hem on the inside of your garment. The next foot is the embroidery foot. So if you can't afford an embroidery machine, you're in luck, because you can get an attachment that allows you to do freehand embroidery on your domestic sewing machine. Once you've got it on, all you've got to do is disengage your feed dogs and you can literally move the fabric all around. I used this foot a lot during my college course for a lot of my art pieces because one of our topics was embroidery, and then also in my video where I did the lion embroidery I used it then. Another foot which is probably worth mentioning is the overlocking foot. Now this foot is basically a mimic of the overlocking machine, so you just attach it to your sewing machine and when you're sewing it cuts the fabric, so it does what an overlocker does, but it isn't as durable. I did use it for a little while, but then not too long after that I got my overlocker, so I can't really say that I put it to the test, but it's worth a try. Another foot that's really important to have is a walking foot. So these come in really handy when you're working with stretchy fabrics, because if you use the normal foot on the stretchy fabric, it kind of stretches it as it's going through the machine, but with a walking foot it literally walks on the fabric, so it's not stretching it. You might also want to get a Teflon foot if you're planning to work with leather or vinyl, because I think the metal ones kind of stick to it. I didn't even make myself experience this because, you know, fabrics can be expensive, so I just went out and bought a Teflon foot and it's done perfectly fine. From my logic, I can imagine it kind of sticks to the fabric, so yeah, you might want to invest in a Teflon foot. Now I feel like I've covered pretty much everything in regards to equipment and demonstrations, so now let's talk about terminology. There's a lot of words to know when understanding sewing, but I've tried to put them down to like the basics that you're probably going to need to know. So I'm just going to put the slides up on the video now so you can screenshot it or just pause the video so that you can read it and take it in. So that brings us to the end of the video, guys. I really hope that you understood everything I was saying and that it wasn't too much, because I made a PowerPoint for this video and then when I was recording I was thinking, am I going a bit too deep for basic? But hopefully you all understood it. If you didn't understand it, please let me know in the comments and I can try and answer your questions, and if I've missed anything out, please let me know. But I guess that's it for episode 1 to Sewing 101. I'm going to be doing tutorials on how you do the zipper fly, the waistbands, the pockets, like pretty much everything there is to sewing, like, you know, all the features that you can add onto a garment. I just think that when I'm doing my sewing tutorials, if I have a video demonstrating how to do what I'm doing, it'll make it easier for you guys, so you can just click on it and learn a bit more about it in depth, and it'll allow my videos to be a little bit shorter because I know sometimes they can drag on. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, guys, and I guess that concludes episode 1. So thank you so much for watching and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye guys.